The flour was old enough to smell like dust and something sadder than dust, and Eleanor Marsh pressed her palms flat against the mercantile counter and breathed through it, the way she had learned to breathe through most things in her 31 years of living. The sack weighed 7 pounds. She had counted out the coins 3 times before she left the boarding house that morning, and she had exactly enough, and she picked up the sack and turned to go. That was when she heard the women talking. They were not speaking quietly. Women in Harland Creek rarely bothered to lower their voices when the subject did not concern them personally, and Eleanor Marsh was the kind of woman who made other women feel very safe speaking at full volume. "Plain as a fence post," the first one said. "Plainer," said the second. "At least a fence post has a use." Eleanor kept walking. She was good at that. She had been walking through comments like those since she was 12 years old, tall and angular and too serious for pretty, and she had developed a stride that suggested she had not heard a word, which was different from not hearing. Outside, the September wind came off the mountains with teeth in it, cutting through her brown wool coat as though the coat were made of paper. Harland Creek, Idaho, in the autumn of 1887, was not a kind place for a woman alone. It was not unkind, exactly. It was simply indifferent, the way the land itself was indifferent, enormous and pale under that early morning sky, asking no one's permission and offering no apologies. Eleanor had come here 6 weeks ago answering a posting at the telegraph office in Boise. Seamstress work, it had said. Steady wages, good house. And the seamstress work had lasted 4 weeks before the woman who hired her decided to move to Oregon to live with her sister, and the good house along with it. She had 7 pounds of flour, $11, and 2 weeks left on her room at Mrs. Dutton's boarding house. Before that autumn ended, a small voice she had never heard before would call her something that would change every plan she had ever made. But she did not know that yet. She only knew the cold and the weight of the sack and the long walk back. The mercantile door opened again behind her. She heard bootsteps, a child's high question, a man's low answer, and she did not turn around. She was good at not turning around, too. Owen Calloway was not good at asking for help. He had proved that across 3 years of trying to raise Lily alone on 40 acres of river-bottom land southeast of town, and the proof was visible in his face, in the set of his jaw and the lines around his eyes that had no business being there on a man of 34. His wife Clara had died of fever 18 months after Lily was born, and the 40 acres had not cared, and the seasons had not waited, and Owen had simply continued. It was the only thing he knew how to do. Lily was 4 now. She had her mother's dark curls and her mother's way of going perfectly still when she was thinking hard, and she had Owen's stubbornness, which was not a small inheritance. She also had, at this particular moment, a death grip on Owen's coat sleeve, and her chin pointed at the back of a woman walking away down the main street of Harland Creek, with a sack of flour over her arm. "Who's that lady?" Lily asked. "Don't know," Owen said. "She's tall." "She is. She looks cold." Owen looked. The woman was tall, and she was walking fast in a way that meant either determination, or the need to keep warm, or both. Her coat was too thin for the morning. He could see that from here. "Come on," he said to Lily, and shifted her to his hip and went into the mercantile. Hester Grady was behind the counter, and she had the expression she wore when she had recently said something she was pleased with. Owen had no interest in whatever it was. He bought his nails and his lamp oil, and he was about to leave when Hester said, in the confidential tone that carried to every corner of a room, "You ought to consider placing a notice, Owen. You can't raise that child alone forever. There's women who'd answer." "I'm managing," he said. "Barely," she said. Not unkindly. That was the worst part. She genuinely believed she was helping. He set his coins on the counter and picked up Lily and walked out. The tall woman was still visible at the far end of the street. He watched her for a moment without meaning to. Then he went to his wagon, loaded his supplies, lifted Lily onto the bench seat, and drove home. That evening he found Lily in the corner of the kitchen trying to pour water from a bucket that was nearly as large as she was. She had soaked her dress and a good portion of the floor, and she looked up at him with complete seriousness and said, "I was trying to make soup." He looked at the puddle. He looked at her. He said, very carefully, "You can't reach the stove." "I know," she said. "That's the part I need help with." He sat down on the floor beside the puddle and thought about that for a while. He went back to town 3 days later. Not because of Hester Grady's advice, and not because of the tall woman with the flour sack, and not because of anything sentimental. He went because Lily had tried to make soup again and this time had managed to get the pot onto the stove, and he had come in from the barn to find the pot empty and smoking, and Lily standing on a chair looking at it with total concentration, waiting for water to appear. She was going to burn the house down by spring. That was a fact. He went to Mrs. Dutton's boarding house because Hester Grady had told him, in their second conversation he had not invited, that there was a seamstress staying there who had lost her work when Margaret Holt moved to Oregon, and that she was respectable and quiet and would not be in Harland Creek much longer if someone did not give her a reason to stay. Owen did not think of himself as someone who gave people reasons, but he stood on Mrs. Dutton's porch and knocked, and when Mrs. Dutton herself answered, he took his hat off and said, "I'm looking for the seamstress, Miss Marsh." "What for?" Mrs. Dutton asked, because she was that kind of woman. "Work," he said. "I have a daughter, she's 4. I need someone who can look after her and keep the house. I'll pay wages and provide room and board." Mrs. Dutton studied him. "That's a lot to ask of a respectable woman." "I know it," he said. "I'm asking anyway." There was a pause on the stairs behind Mrs. Dutton. He looked up. The tall woman from the street was standing halfway down, very still, her hand on the rail. She had gray eyes. He had not expected gray eyes. He had not expected to notice. "Mr. she said. "Calloway," he said. "Owen Calloway. I have 40 acres on the river. A house, a barn, a good well. I need someone to look after my daughter while I work the land. I'm not asking for anything beyond that. I'll put it in writing if you want." Eleanor Marsh stood on Mrs. Dutton's stairs and looked at this man. His careful face, his worn coat, the way he held his hat in both hands like he was not accustomed to asking. And she thought about $11 and 2 weeks and the flour that was already half gone. "How old is your daughter?" she said. 4, he said. "Her name is Lily." "Does she bite?" Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, close to one. "Only when provoked," he said. Eleanor came down the rest of the stairs. "I want wages every Friday," she said. "I want Sundays to myself. I want it in writing, as you said, and I want to meet the child before I decide." "Fair," he said. She met Lily the following morning. Owen brought the wagon into town at 8 o'clock, and Lily was sitting on the bench seat wrapped in a quilt like a small and very serious parcel. And when Eleanor approached the wagon, Lily looked at her for a long time with those dark eyes that missed nothing. "You're tall," Lily said. "I am," Eleanor said. "Do you know how to make soup?" "I do." Lily appeared to consider the full weight of this information. Then she said, "You can sit by me," and moved 6 inches to the left on the bench seat, which, given the quilt, was a significant offer. Eleanor looked at Owen. Owen looked at the middle distance in a way that suggested he was trying very hard not to have an expression. Eleanor picked up her bag and climbed up beside Lily, and they drove out of Harland Creek in the cold morning light, and the child pressed her small quilted shoulder against Eleanor's arm the entire way, and neither of them said anything more about it. The house was better than Eleanor had expected, and harder than she had imagined, which turned out to be the same thing. It was solidly built. Owen had built it himself, and you could see his character in the corners, which were square, and the windows, which were set true. But it was a man's house, in the way that all houses become when a man has lived alone in them too long. Functional, stripped of anything that wasn't necessary. There was one chair at the kitchen table. Eleanor noticed that first. One chair, one cup, one plate set on the shelf, as though the shelf had only ever been asked to hold one of anything. Lily ate in a small rocker that Owen had wedged against the table as a second seat, and it tilted forward when she leaned on it, which she did constantly, which meant Owen spent several minutes of every meal reaching out to catch her before she pitched forward into her food. "She needs a proper chair," Eleanor said on the second morning. "I know it," Owen said. He was pulling on his coat to go out to the barn. He said it the way a man says something he has not yet found the hour to fix. Eleanor did not say anything more, but she noticed there was a short length of good lumber standing against the far wall of the kitchen, and she noticed where Owen kept his tools. She spent her first week learning the house. The stove had a particular temper. It ran hot on the left side and needed watching, or it would scorch whatever was nearest. The well water was cold and clean and came up with a slight mineral taste that softened in soup. The root cellar held potatoes, dried beans, 2 strings of onions, and a crock of salt pork that would last through December if they were careful. Eleanor was always careful. Lily followed her everywhere, not underfoot. She had more grace than that, even at 4, but present, constant, appearing around corners and in doorways the way a cat appears, silent and curious, and entirely certain of its right to be wherever it was. On the 3rd day, Lily brought her a pine cone. It was an enormous one, dry and open, and she presented it with both hands and total ceremony. "What's this for?" Eleanor asked. "It's pretty," Lily said. Eleanor set it on the windowsill above the wash basin, where it caught the afternoon light. Lily examined this placement, found it acceptable, and went back to whatever she had been doing. Owen came in at midday to find Eleanor at the stove and the pine cone on the sill, and he looked at it for a moment longer than a pine cone warranted. He did not say anything. But the next morning there was a second cup on the shelf beside the first one. Eleanor pretended not to notice. She poured coffee into both of them when she made it, and left his on the edge of the stove where it would stay warm, and when he came in from the barn and found it there, he picked it up without a word and stood by the door drinking it, and that became the beginning of something, though neither of them would have called it that yet. The trouble came from the direction Eleanor had half expected but hoped she was wrong about. Its name was Gerald Fitch, and he owned the largest parcel of land north of the river, and he had been making quiet arrangements for 3 years to own more. Owen's 40 acres sat on the south bank at a bend where the river ran clearest and the soil was blackest. It was not the biggest piece of land in the valley. It was the best piece, in the ways that mattered to a man who understood water. Fitch had offered to buy it twice before, and Owen had said no twice, in the way Owen said most things, briefly, without decoration. Fitch had accepted those answers with the patience of a man who believed that circumstances would eventually do his persuading for him. In October, Fitch found his circumstance. Owen had taken a small loan from the Harland Creek bank the previous spring to replace his plow team after the old horses gave out. It was a fair loan, properly drawn, and Owen had made 2 payments on it already. The 3rd was due in November. He had the money set aside in a tin box under the floorboards. Eleanor had seen him check it twice without meaning to watch, and there was no reason it should not be a straightforward thing. But Fitch had a cousin who had recently become the new bank officer in Harland Creek, and the new bank officer had quietly rewritten the terms of several small loans in the ledger, advancing their due dates by 6 weeks, which was enough to put a man in default before he knew he was in trouble. Owen came in from town on a Tuesday evening with the kind of stillness on his face that was different from his ordinary quiet. He sat down at the table, There were 2 chairs at the table now, because Eleanor had found the lumber and Owen's tools and built a second one, plain and solid, on a Sunday afternoon while Lily supervised from the rocker, and he set a piece of paper on the table and looked at it. Eleanor put Lily to bed and came back and looked at the paper too. "They're saying the payment was due in October," Owen said, "not November. Is that what it says in the original?" "No." Eleanor sat down. "May I read it?" He pushed the paper toward her. She read it carefully, the way she read everything, and then she said, "Do you still have your original loan agreement?" He looked at her. "The paper you signed," she said. "In the spring." Something shifted in his face. He got up from the table, went to the shelf by the door, lifted down a tin box she had not known was there, opened it, and produced a folded piece of paper. He brought it to the table and unfolded it beside the bank's notice. The dates were different, not by much, but clearly, plainly different. "Gerald Fitch," Owen said. It was not a question. "Probably," Eleanor said. "Do you know anyone who would know the law? A lawyer or a judge?" "There's a circuit judge comes through in November," Owen said. "When in November?" "Second week. And the default notice says, 1st week." Eleanor looked at the paper. Eleanor looked at the wall. Eleanor was, beneath the practical surface of her, a woman who had spent 31 years being underestimated by people who were not as careful or as thorough as she was, and something in her went very quiet and very focused, the way it did when a problem had a solution that was simply waiting to be found. "Write to the circuit judge," she said. "Today. Request an emergency review. Enclose copies of both documents, your original and theirs. Send it with the morning mail." Owen looked at her. "You know about these things?" "My father was a county clerk in Ohio," she said. "I grew up around land disputes. I know how they work." She paused. "I also know that a man who changes the terms of a legal document after signing is committing fraud, and that circuit judges take a dim view of it." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've been here 5 weeks." "Yes," she said. "You built that chair. You needed a second one." He looked at the chairs. He looked at her. He said, "Thank you, Eleanor." And it was the first time he had used her given name, and the room felt different afterward, though the room had not changed at all. They wrote the letter together that night, at the table with 2 chairs, Lily asleep in the back room and the fire burning low, and Owen's hand and Eleanor's hand both on the edge of the paper as they worked out the words. She mailed it in the morning. Owen rode to town himself and went to see the bank officer, not in anger, but with the copy of his original loan document folded in his coat pocket, and his face set in the particular way it set when he had decided something, and he said, very quietly, that he was aware of the discrepancy, and that he had been in contact with the circuit court, and the bank officer, who was a weak man at the bottom of someone else's scheme, went pale and said he would look into the matter. The circuit judge arrived on the 8th of November, 2 days early, because Owen had written a second letter that was less formal and more direct, and judges are human beings and sometimes respond to directness. He reviewed both documents in the parlor of the Harland Creek courthouse and said, in language that was not at all uncertain, that the alteration was clear, that the original terms stood, and that if the bank wished to pursue any further irregularities, they could do so in his presence. Gerald Fitch did not come to that meeting. He sent no word. He simply receded, the way men like him recede when the ground shifts under their schemes. And within a fortnight he was said to be looking at parcels in the next county, and Owen's 40 acres remained Owen's 40 acres. The evening after the judge's decision, Owen came home and stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before he said anything. Lily was at the table, drawing shapes on a piece of brown paper with a charcoal stub. Eleanor was making cornbread. "It's settled," he said. "Good," Eleanor said. Judge agreed the original terms were the binding ones. I know, I expected he would. Owen stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he came in and sat down at the table, at his chair, the one that had always been there, and watched Lily draw a very serious circle. Then he said very quietly, not to anyone in particular, I should have built a second chair a long time ago. Eleanor did not look up from the cornbread, but she felt the words settle somewhere they did not leave. November moved toward December, and the cold came in earnest, wrapping the 40 acres in silence and white. The river slowed. The mornings were hard and dark, and the stove needed stoking before 5 if the kitchen was going to be warm by the time Lily woke. Eleanor woke before 5. She had always woken early. It had been a lonely habit before. Here it was not lonely. There was the fire to build, the coffee to put on, and then the particular silence of a sleeping house that she had come to think of as the best part of the day, hers alone, before anyone needed anything, the dark windows going slowly gray, the smell of wood smoke and coffee, and the cold coming under the door. Owen began waking earlier. She did not say anything about this. The first morning he appeared at 5:30, she simply handed him a cup of coffee, and he leaned against the kitchen wall and drank it, and they were quiet together, which was a different thing from being quiet separately. Lily, for her part, had begun calling Eleanor something she had not been asked to call her, and that no one had suggested. It happened on a morning in late November, casually, as Lily things tended to happen. She was eating her porridge, and she looked up and said, conversationally, to Owen, "Mama said the creek freezes by Christmas." There was a silence. Owen looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at her porridge. "Lily," Owen said, very carefully. "She said the creek freezes," Lily repeated, with the absolute patience of someone repeating information they believe has simply not been heard correctly. Owen looked at Eleanor for a long moment. Eleanor felt the look the way you feel the first real cold of the season, sudden, clarifying, impossible to pretend away. She said, "I said the river, not the creek." Lily considered this technical distinction and found it unimportant. "Mama said the river," she corrected herself and went back to her porridge. After Lily was down for her nap that afternoon, Owen stood in the kitchen while Eleanor was mending a tear in his work shirt, and he said, without preamble, the way he said everything, "The contract we wrote in October." "Yes," she said. "I'd like to change the terms," he said. She looked up. "Not the wages," he said quickly. "Not the duties. He stopped. He was not a man who stumbled over words. When he stumbled, it meant something. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Not as a hired woman, as—" He paused again. "I'm not a man who says things well," he said. "You know that by now." "I know it," she said. "But I know what this house was before October, and I know what it is now. And I know you built that chair without being asked, and I know you wrote half that letter to the judge, and I know my daughter calls you—" He stopped. "I know what she calls you." Eleanor set the mending down. "The town says I'm plain," she said. It came out steadier than she expected. "The town," Owen said, with a brevity that managed to say a great deal, "is wrong." She looked at him. His face was open in a way she had not seen it open before, all the careful stillness set aside, and underneath it was just a man who had been alone for a long time and had found, by accident or by grace, that he did not want to be alone anymore. "I'll stay," she said. "If you're asking." "I'm asking," he said. She picked the mending back up, because her hands needed something to do. "We should talk to Reverend Marks," she said. "I'll go in the morning," he said. "All right," she said. He stood there another moment. Then he said, "Eleanor." "Yes, I'm glad you came down those stairs." She did not look up, because if she looked up, she would not be able to say the next thing steadily. "So am I," she said. And she meant it all the way down to the ground. They were married on the 14th of December in the Harland Creek church, in a ceremony attended by Reverend Marks and Mrs. Dutton and a handful of neighbors who came mostly out of curiosity and stayed because the cold made everything feel more serious. Lily wore her good dress and stood between Owen and Eleanor with a proprietary air that suggested she considered the whole arrangement to have been her idea, which, in the ways that mattered, was not entirely wrong. There was no great speech. Owen put a plain gold ring on Eleanor's finger. Clara's ring had been buried with Clara, and this one was new, bought from the silversmith in Harland Creek, with money Owen had set aside quietly over the past 2 weeks, and he said his vows in the same voice he said everything, low and certain, and Eleanor said hers back, and Reverend Marks said the words over them, and it was done. Lily tugged Eleanor's sleeve immediately afterward. "Does this mean you're staying?" she asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Good," Lily said, with complete satisfaction, and took both their hands, Owen's on one side, Eleanor's on the other, and walked them out of the church and into the cold white morning, as though she were the one leading them home, which, in the truest sense, she was. They built that life through the winter and into spring, slowly, the way all lasting things are built, one ordinary day laid over the next. Eleanor learned the 40 acres the way she had learned the stove, by attention and by patience. The low corner that flooded in March thaw, the south-facing slope where the kitchen garden would go, the particular sound the wind made in the cottonwoods by the river when the season was about to change. Owen learned, in his quiet way, that a house does not need to be stripped down to its necessities in order to be sturdy. Eleanor put curtains in the kitchen window. She put a second pine cone beside Lily's first one on the sill, and then a dried wildflower from the creek bank, and the windowsill became a small and particular history of the months that had passed. Owen watched it accumulate and said nothing, but once, in March, he came in from the field with a smooth white stone he had turned up with the plow, and he set it on the sill without explanation, and Eleanor said nothing either, and the stone stayed. By April, the kitchen garden was planted, and Lily had learned, under Eleanor's careful instruction, how to help without causing structural harm to the stove or the water supply. She was not yet 5. She was already precise, focused, and deeply satisfied by the act of making something with her hands, which was, Eleanor thought, not entirely unlike her father. Owen said, one evening in late April, while they sat on the porch in the first real warmth of the year, "Hester Grady told me you were plain." Eleanor looked at him. She said, "The first time I came to town after you arrived, that there was a plain seamstress at Mrs. Dutton's who needed work." He was quiet for a moment. "I think she meant it as a recommendation, that you were sensible, not the other way." "I know what she meant," Eleanor said. "Doesn't matter," he said. "No," she said. "It doesn't." He reached over, without looking at her, and took her hand where it lay on the arm of her chair, and held it in the way that had become ordinary between them now, easy and certain, the way breathing is ordinary, the way the river is ordinary, there and there and there. Lily's voice came from inside the house, calling about supper, and Owen called back that they were coming, and Eleanor stood and he stood, and they went inside together, into the light and the warmth and the particular life that had been built, not in a single moment, but in a second chair and a pine cone, and a letter to a circuit judge, and a small girl's matter-of-fact insistence on calling things what they were. There is something worth saying about a life that begins in a bargain. Most of the time, if you look back on it from the right distance, you'll find the bargain was just the door. The real life was already waiting on the other side. Eleanor Marsh walked through that door because she needed work, and Owen Calloway needed help, and those things were true. But underneath those things, both of them needed what everyone needs, the thing that is hardest to put in writing and easiest to feel. Someone to hand you a cup of coffee before the sun comes up, someone to build a chair beside yours, someone who sees you clearly and stays. It was Lily who said it first, and said it the simplest, the way children say the truest things. She didn't call Eleanor plain. She didn't call her hired help or housekeeper or the woman from town. She called her Mama, and she was right, and she knew it before anyone else did. If this story moved something in you tonight, leave a word below and tell us, what is it that turns a bargain into a blessing? We'd love to hear what you think, and if you'd like to stay on for more of these old frontier journeys, please do subscribe. We'll have another one waiting for you. Good night. God bless you, each and every one.